Good evening. My name is Betty Ricter, and I'm the Housing Specialist for East Brunswick in the Department of Planning and Community Development. I'd like you to consider for a moment living in a well-maintained residential neighborhood in whose midst is a badly deteriorated 12-unit garden apartment complex. Consider the plight of tenants living in this garden apartment complex, whose landlord boards up windows and doors rather than make repairs, supplies insufficient heat, and ignores other disruptive tenants. Consider also the problems of a township whose agencies, in spite of persistent efforts, are unable to bring this landlord and property into compliance with existing codes. This is the situation that existed at Victory Gardens Apartments on Memorial Drive and Victory Place in East Brunswick. The problem is not unique. Many municipalities struggle with this same kind of difficulty. What is unique is the approach that East Brunswick took, its resourcefulness and its determination to find a workable solution, and happily, the resulting formation of a local nonprofit housing corporation, the East Brunswick Community Housing Corporation. With me tonight are Carl Hintz, Director of the Department of Planning and Community Development for the Township, and Roberta, who was formerly the housing manager in East Brunswick and continues to serve as a board member for East Brunswick Community Housing Corporation. Carl, you've been with this project from the beginning. Could you tell us how East Brunswick decided they were going to deal with this problem?
Well, there were several ways. One was to first try code enforcement. We had instituted a number of enforcement agencies to look into the problem, to try to address some of the concerns of the neighbors and concerns of the residents themselves, but without much luck or success. We found resistance from the landlord to accomplish anything, to try to solve any of the problems. And there was quite a bit of expense in township time and staff time, the code enforcement agency, the police staff, health department, and so on, building inspection, trying to establish violations and try to see the landlord correct those. The problems of enforcement were enormous, and without the cooperation of the landlord, it was just impossible. The township then decided to take action known as declaration of blight, which is allowed for under the state statute, New Jersey state law. And what was done was to undertake studies for redevelopment for the property and review it with the planning board. A blight hearing was held, and the planning board, after considering all the past enforcement problems with the property and lack of maintenance and the difficulties and the way that the apartments were blighting the neighborhood, found that the apartments were blighted, in fact, under state statute. That blight hearing then allowed the township to take action known as condemnation, where they could take the property off after getting fair market value awarded through appraisals for the property. This process of getting the fair market value accepted by the landlord took a long period of time, and the condemnation process and the litigation involved took a period of approximately 2 years to accomplish. And we were at every step through the process of legal action. We were successful, but it did necessitate us taking it to higher levels, because every time we won at one level, the landlord found some other legal loophole or whatever and appealed it, and we went on to the next, again winning again, but then found something else. So through this overall period, we were finally able to take over the units. Through that period of time, we also applied for our share of community development revenue sharing funds to go towards our what are known as our block grant funds to go towards the rehabilitation acquisition of the units. The township was entitled to so many dollars through its allocation, and we received $320,000 over a 3-year period, which we assigned to acquire the property and then to rehabilitate the units.
Okay, obviously the township wasn't prepared to function as a full-time landlord. And to this end, they suggested and ultimately was organized a nonprofit housing corporation. This is a group of private citizens. Roberta is a member of that corporation and has been since its inception. Roberta helped to organize it. The members originally came from various religious organizations through the township. Roberta, could you tell us a little bit about the corporation, what its constituency is?
Well, initially, I worked with the Clergy Council, who either representatives directly recruited members of their churches or invited me to participate in a service of some kind in order to explain the problem to the residents and to get representatives. Each of the people came as individuals, not necessarily representing their religious organization. In addition, we have added neighbors and people who aren't involved directly with church groups to our group. We have spent 5 years together in seeing this project through, and have become learned to know each other well, and are also looking to include anybody who would like to join us. It is an interesting project that we've all embarked on.
Okay. As Carl mentioned, this litigation took almost 2 years, and although that was a very frustrating time, I'm sure, for the corporation, they used that time to develop architectural plans, the organizational skills necessary for management. They've developed operating budgets and rent collection procedures, rules and regulations, lease forms, maintenance procedures, and generally worked out the logistics of accomplishing substantial rehabilitation while 8 of the 12 apartments were occupied. How were you able to do that, Roberta?
Well, we had the guidance. All of us brought something to the board. There were social workers, somebody in real estate, somebody just with finesse with people, because part of our problem was dealing with the tenants who had to be moved from their apartments. We moved them into trailers, 2 at a time, 2 families at a time, renovated those 2, and moved people back. Eventually, we got rid of the trailers and moved people into the finished apartments. Till we've completed all 12 of the units.
Carl, can you tell us something about the apartments? What were they really like before the rehab?
Well, they were in quite a state of disrepair. Both the outsides of the units and the surrounding grounds, as well as the interior of the units. I'll start with the grounds. For the most part, there was no landscaping on the site. It was just, in fact, I remember doing some early studies, and I don't recall that there being one single tree on the property. There are no trees, no amenities. There are children there, of course, and the children had nothing to play on. The units had little, if any, outside space to use. Things that we all appreciate, such as an outside patio, for example. There were none of those amenities on the exterior. And even small things were that we consider to be very important were problems. For example, the railings that led to the units to get into the units, in several cases the railings were missing. To walk up the steps themselves were deteriorated, cracked, and so on. There was a lot of mud outside, no grass, well, what grass there was, it was spotty. And it was generally an unsightly condition, as well as a very inconvenient one for the tenants themselves. On the inside, well, let me step you into the unit, if maybe that's the best way to do it, but from the outside or the inside, whichever way you want to look at it, there was no winterization for the units. A couple of the tenants had put on storm doors of their own. However, the landlord made no efforts at all to winterize the units. There were no storm windows. There were no screens in a lot of the units, or what screens there were wholly and needed repair. So that both during the winter, which is, I'm thinking of that, you know, as we talk about it now, but also during the summertime, there were very little conveniences for someone living inside with the lack of screens and again, the lack of storm windows and lack of storm doors. A lot of the essential windows, if you will, or, you know, the regular windows, casements were leaking air, no caulking, broken windows, that sort of thing. On the interior of the units themselves, I guess one of the major complaints that we had was the heating plant. The heating units were one of the most antiquated ones I've seen. They were a kind of a space heater that was built into the floor. On the downstairs, on the first floor of the unit, it was a gas-fired unit that was embedded in the floor itself, not what you would think of as a boiler or a furnace. It was just roughly a 2x3 little gas-fired operation, which sometimes worked and most times didn't in a lot of the units. We had a number of complaints about that. And for the heat to get to the upstairs, there was no duct system as we might know it. There were no pipes with radiators, or there were no hot air type of units. There was a grate in the floor between the second floor looking down to the first floor. And that grate was situated above the heater that was in the first floor, so that the heat would supposedly radiate upwards and heat the second floor. And it was really pretty sad. The other problem, I guess, one of the other major problems in terms of the utilities was the hot water for each of the units. The hot water units were located individually, and they were located in crawl space, or there were a couple of instances in the units where there were basement areas. But since there were no covers over the cellar doorways or the cellar crawl space areas, every time it rained, water would get into the crawl space or to the basement, and in a number of cases the hot water heaters failed because of water. I remember sending the plumber down a couple of times to repair it, and I had problems getting the plumber to even work under those conditions because of the fear of getting electrocuted and trying to repair the unit. So that was definitely a real problem. Of course, stoves didn't work in all cases. Refrigerators didn't work in all cases, and what there was of them, they were pretty bad shape. Sinks leaked. Bathrooms upstairs, I remember the shower stalls in one unit didn't work, and it was always clogged up. They always had a problem with the plumbing in a number of the units. Those are some of the major problems. There were, of course, problems such as baseboards not being put in properly, and there being huge gaps so that air could leak up into the units, so you'd have it very cold in the wintertime. And that, of course, was a natural area for the cockroaches. The cockroaches were all over the units, and they would make their way from one unit to another through all the cracks and lack of seams in the baseboards and the like. Mm-hmm. The walls themselves were falling down. Needed new plastering here and there. Painting was all done by the tenants themselves. What there was of it, the landlord didn't take any effort in that regard.
Can you tell us briefly what kinds of work was done on the units?
I haven't finished all the problems.
Oh.
What I wanted to mention for functioning was the fact that there were no clotheslines. That was one of the big complaints of the tenants.
That was a major concern because there weren't, there was no way. The units were very Spartan. They had a small kitchen, small eating area off of that, and it opened up to a larger room, into what you would call a living room. But the unit was not that big, and then upstairs 2 small bedrooms. And so there was no place to put a dryer. There was no place to put a clothes washer. And I know that is really a concern. And there were people wanted to put outside lines to hang up clothes, and there wasn't even that provided by the landlord. A lot of the amenities, just the basics that we would consider, just weren't there. Have I covered everything?
Yeah, you want to tell us a little bit about what was done and what the situation is there
Okay.
now.
Well, we undertook a design with an architectural firm. First, we had a meeting with the tenants to try to figure out what were their problems. The architects and members of the township staff met with them, and then the architects met over time with the tenants, trying to determine what they would like to see as terms of improvements. That process, as it moved through, resulted in the architects coming up with revised both exterior and interior renovations to the units. That was reviewed by the nonprofit, by the East Brunswick Community Housing Corporation. Myself and my staff, we worked with the architect, and we took care of the outside work in terms of site improvements, including a clothesline. And in fact, we have 2 clotheslines those were put in right away with our township public works staff. We did undertake some immediate improvements as a kind of a stopgap measure in the meantime until we got the contractor at work out there. But we, for example, took care of some of the immediate problems of lack of heaters working, or trying to take care of some of the hot water heaters working, as I mentioned earlier, with the plumber. We also put some temporary play equipment out on the site until we got the contract going. We repaired the railings and things like that. We tried to winterize wherever we could. And then when the contract got going, then of course the units were completely renovated on the interior, and patios were created with wing walls, separate a lot of landscaping was added to the property. And physical improvements to the exterior of the building to winterize it and improve its appearance and so on were all done. Quite substantial improvements.
Well, what's the heating system there now?
Maybe Roberta
Oh.
will answer that one.
We have hot air systems which have ducts that carry the heat to all the rooms, as one would find in any modern home. The hot water heaters, the cellar has been waterproofed, and the hot water heaters are located in a place where first of all, there won't be any water in the basement, but where they're accessible for servicing, which is very important. The tenants do take care of their own utilities, so they are responsible for the maintenance of these units, or seeing that if they aren't getting service. What's happened that is remarkable to me is the first few apartments I ever went into, which is now almost 6 years ago, where there were improvements made. They were dark paneling on the wall, and one felt that one was walking into a dark hole, and the light walls in good condition, and the newly finished floors, wooden floors that had been refinished, really do make it a cheery place to live. We haven't expanded the area of living, but we certainly have expanded the horizons of the people who live in the apartments now by providing a very suitable environment.
How about kitchens, bathrooms?
The kitchens have all been modernized, and the bathrooms were all modernized. They have the kitchens have cabinets and formica counters, and vents for the stoves. And the bathrooms have all been resurfacing of tile where necessary, and new bathtubs and new water closets and new sinks. They're modern apartments in every sense of the word, despite their rather small size.
And how does the corporation take care of ongoing maintenance?
Well, we have hired a part-time superintendent who has an answering service, and he services all the calls. And again, I like to bring it back to the nonprofit, this group of people who do it in their spare time and out of the goodness of their heart, because there certainly haven't been any rewards but self-rewards in this project, and see to it things happen. For instance, I just worked with one of the committee members on buying a snow blower so that at the next snowstorm we'll be able to remove the snow. And there are all these kinds of projects that involve with either taking care of your own home or being a landlord, are handled by a committee at our monthly meetings, and sometimes quite often during the month over the telephone.
Carl mentioned that tenant input was solicited during the rehab planning, and that we worked with neighbors. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Has their input continued?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, both the, well, two members of the corporation are people who live in the neighborhood, and tenants frequently come to board meetings to discuss their problems with us. In fact, it's become interesting. We have to differentiate that we're basically the landlords, as we lease the apartments from the town. The township owns them, and we lease them. We have a 15-year lease. And we have to let our tenants know that we're not there to solve all their problems for them, but to be their landlords and to maintain a decent place for them to live. So, and we go on. We really would like to have more people from the neighborhood come and join us on the corporation.
It sounds like neighborhood input was terribly important to this.
Absolutely, and is continuing to be necessary, because except for the neighbors who are on the corporation, no one else lives in the neighborhood, so we count on people who live in the neighborhood. For instance, I called last night and said, did the contractor get out there? And the only way, one of the neighbors stuck his head out to see if something had been done, and so it's very important people in the neighborhood really be involved with us.
How do both of you see the corporation's role now that the major rehab work is done at Victory Gardens and things are on a maintenance basis? How do you, as a township representative and you as a corporation representative, see the corporation's future role?
Well, I see it in a couple of different areas. One is rehabilitation of other units that may become problems over time, and that are problems now. They're not perhaps as enormous as Victory Gardens. We have 1 or 2 or 3 units here and there. They can be of assistance in that area. And secondly, through provision of new housing. There are people in the township that cannot afford to live in the housing that they'd like to live in, and they need assistance. And one of the ways to provide that is through a nonprofit housing corporation that can become the sponsor and builder of units. And thereby reducing the builder's profit costs out of that process.
Can you add anything to that?
Well, we've spent 5 years working at this rehabilitation, and now we've really spent the last 6 months learning how to be landlords. And I think in the next few months we're going to feel much more comfortable with our role of landlord and willing to look at projects that Carl mentions. I've heard members of the committee express interest both in doing further rehabilitation and in doing new units. I think this will be a whole new field for us to explore, and I see us going forward with the same energy and diligence that the corporation showed during the last 5 years.
Okay. I hope you'll agree that the results of this innovative undertaking are really exciting. I'd like to thank Carl and Roberta for being on tonight's program, and encourage anybody who's interested in joining this energetic group to contact the municipal offices by calling 390-6870. Thank you and good night.